Welcome to my kitchen. My name is Stephanie from the Farmhouse Mom, and in this video we are going to bake our first loaf of sourdough bread together. And before I start the video, I just wanted to say that I forgot one of the steps. I did not proof my dough overnight in the refrigerator, and so it did come out a little overproofed. But I thought that was a perfect opportunity to include this in the video for those who are starting to learn sourdough and what to do if you do make mistakes while you're baking your loaf. Thank you so much for joining me, and let's get started baking. Hey everyone, my name is Stephanie from the Farmhouse Mom, and today we are going to bake our first loaf of sourdough bread together. I'm also going to share a recipe for a versatile flatbread, pizza bread, sandwich bread that is going to be perfect for using up all of that sourdough discard and is always great for breakfast, dinner, or lunch. All right, let's go ahead and start with our sourdough bread. So for this recipe, we are just going to be using King Arthur bread flour. You know that I love my Nutrimel Harvest. I love the flavor profile and the nutritional benefits of fresh ground flour. But if you're just getting started in sourdough, you probably don't have a grain mill and you probably don't have a lot of sourdough utensils. So we're gonna go through our first loaf together. I'm gonna show you what it looks like in every stage, and I'm going to share some of the things that you may or may not want to purchase as you are starting your sourdough journey. Let's get started with our recipes first. So we're going to make our sourdough bread and then our sandwich bread. So you are going to want an active fed starter. My starter is really strong, and so I really can bake with it at any time, whether it is hungry and needs to be fed, whether it is nice and bubbly and active. I use it for any recipe at any time, and then I adjust the water. And so it really is very versatile once you get it strong and once you start using it. So let's start making our bread. So we are going to start with a half a cup of sourdough starter. And mine is kind of halfway between fed and hungry. And to that, we are going to add a cup of water. So when I first started baking sourdough about 4 or 5 years ago, I really got hung up on the exact amount of grams of everything, and it led to a lot of really flat loaves. The hydration level on your sourdough starter can be different every day. Sometimes it has more water, sometimes it has less water, and you'll find you'll have to adjust your recipes because of your sourdough starter. So we've got our water and our sourdough starter. We're going to stir this up. We are going to start with 3 cups of flour. Let's go ahead and put our salt in as well, 1.5 teaspoons. It's gonna go ahead and use our Danish dough hook. I will say the very first thing that I bought for sourdough is this Danish whisk. It's so awesome. I got so tired of mixing with my hands the sourdough, and I would pull my hands out and I swear half the loaf would be on my fingers. So I really like this. I'll leave a link in the description of the one that I got, but you can find them almost anywhere. All right, so we have our shaggy dough here, so we're just gonna cover this and set this aside, and then we're going to work on our sandwich bread. And of course, these recipes can be found on thefarmhousemom.com. I promised you guys 3 recipes, and Tuesday I made a sourdough peanut butter cookie. You can go back to Tuesday's video if you want to see me make that. I made this earlier, so I'm just gonna be showing you what I made before. So we're gonna start with 1 cup of starter, a half a cup of water, 2 cups of flour, a teaspoon of salt, a teaspoon of honey, and then about a teaspoon of olive oil, just enough to cover the dough. Because I have already made my flatbread earlier in the day, I'll go ahead and pull that out. But I want to show you something. This is how much is left of my starter. Not very much at all, just some scrapings. So I frequently, probably weekly, will do this. I will use up every little bit of my sourdough starter, and I just have a little bit there at the bottom, a little bit on the sides, and I will just fill it up with water and flour, and it almost kind of like restarts and recharges your starter. Don't worry if you're making a recipe and you're using up all of your discard. That is a great thing, because then you can refeed it and it will get nice and supercharged. I really appreciate all of the comments on my sourdough starter video, and it really let me know how many people have kind of tried sourdough and got really frustrated with it. I know I was really frustrated at the beginning because I'm a very step-by-step person, and sourdough kind of requires you to just use your common sense and use your creativity. If you bake and you know what dough is supposed to look like, if it's like a really soggy dough, you know you need to add a little more flour. If your dough is really stiff, then just spritz it down with a little bit of water, give it a little bit more liquid. We have our sourdough starter fed. I'm gonna put that to the side, and we are gonna go to our flatbread. All right, so we have our flatbread and we have our sourdough that has been sitting for about an hour. So with my flatbread, I'm gonna go ahead and just do a couple of stretches, and I'm gonna tuck it back in on itself, just so it can start to get some gluten and start to hold its shape. And then we're gonna do the same thing on our sourdough. So that shagginess where there's a little bit of dryness there, we're gonna start stretching and tucking that under, doing some stretch and folds. And that shaggy dough is gonna start to come into a little bit of a smoother dough. So throughout the day, if I'm making flatbread and if I'm making sourdough, I will do 3 to 6 stretch and folds just to start to get that gluten formation going. I will tell you, there have been many times where I've done 1 or 2 stretch and folds and I just totally forgot about it. Maybe I got busy on the farm and the loaf has turned out fine. All right, so we are gonna go ahead and cover our loaf of sourdough bread, and we're going to cover our flatbread, and then every 15 or 30 minutes, we are going to continue to do our stretch and folds. So I made this flatbread around 11 o'clock this morning, and we'll probably eat around 5 or 5:30. That will be more than enough time for this flatbread to be ready for dinner. I also will put it in my oven at a 95-degree warming temp, but you will see for our sourdough bread, after we are done with the stretching and folding and it has doubled, this will go into the refrigerator overnight. I'm gonna go out and check on Katerina, whose due date is today, and then we will come back in 30 minutes and do our stretch and folds on our bread. All right, here's our little Katerina that's due. She looks like she's still hanging in there, so maybe not till tonight. So throughout the afternoon, I probably did 3 or 4 stretch and folds on the flatbread, and I generally can start this around noon and it will be ready in about 4 or 5 hours, especially if I put it in my oven at my 95-degree warming temperature and it gets into a nice little beautiful dough. We can have this for breakfast burritos. I will use it for lunchtime, make like a little lunch meat wrap or even a peanut butter and jelly wrap, and I especially use it for dinner time. If I have leftovers, I can just pull out everything I have and we can come up with some sort of little wrap or little burrito, and it is a great little recipe.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our sourdough loaf. I typically make this with fresh milled whole wheat, kind of a half and half, but I wanted to make it with just bread flour. As you're getting started, a lot of times you don't have different types of flours around. So I did those stretch and folds. This is in the evening. I did those stretch and folds probably 5 to 6 times throughout the day. And like I said before, if you feel like your dough is really like very shaggy and very dry, you can spritz it down with a little bit of water in between the stretch and folds. But if it's coming into a nice little soft dough, then you're doing good. So at this point, I felt like it was doubled in bulk and I put it on the counter and I started shaping it. What I usually do is I make it into a rectangle and I fold it into thirds like an envelope. So I'll fold it down on itself and then back up, and then I will just roll it up. Then I start doing my pushes and pulls. And so I push it away and then tuck it back under as I pull it toward me. And this creates some tension in the loaf. So when you do bake it, it's a nice little poofy loaf. I will set that on the counter for a couple of minutes. We'll put it in these little Banneton baskets. You don't really need those. You can just use a bowl if you want to, but I get a dishcloth and I make sure I have a lot of rice flour on it. This one I have just used over and over, and so it's still kind of just like stiff from the last time that I used the rice flour. And then I will wrap it in a plastic bag, and I wanted to proof this a little bit longer overnight, and that's when I forgot to put it in the refrigerator. So this is the next morning and we're going to bake it. I put a parchment paper, a little bit of cornmeal, and for myself I just do a very simple scoring. I just do a cross. I use a Lodge cast iron Dutch oven. I bake it for about 20 minutes at 500, and then I go another 10 to 15 minutes at about 450.
Okay, here's our bread. And we totally overproofed it because I forgot to put it in the refrigerator overnight. But we're gonna go ahead and cut it open and I'm gonna show you what it looks like. So here's our little bread. So when you overproof it and you let it ferment for too long, it gets to be where it's a little flat. But as you can see, this is still a nice little bread that's totally salvageable. So even though we messed up on this bread, this is still a really soft, beautiful loaf. So that's what happens with sourdough sometimes, especially in the summertime. It gets really warm and there's so many times that I've overproofed so many loaves of bread. But just go ahead and bake it. It's still going to be a wonderful loaf of bread. It may not be something that you're gonna wanna post on Instagram or Facebook or brag to everybody, but it's still gonna be really good and really delicious. I thought about remaking this video. I was like, oh no, I worked so hard and then I forgot to put it in the refrigerator overnight, and now it's not going to turn out to be a really pretty loaf. But I thought it was important to go ahead and include it just to show you that it's okay. That's going to happen with sourdough, and it really is a little bit of an art. So I hope this encourages you to let you know that even though I've been baking sourdough for about 5 years, sometimes things get busy and sometimes you just forget about your sourdough loaf, but all is not lost. Just go ahead and bake it. It's gonna be fine. I hope this helps you learning to bake sourdough. For me, it's really helpful to see the steps and to see what everything is supposed to look like. Sometimes when you're reading a recipe, you don't get a really clear view of what it's supposed to look like, and then you just continue your step and you don't really know where your mistakes were. Thank you guys so much for being here, and I will see you Tuesday. I'm planning on a thrifting video for you if the weather holds out. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thanks for stopping by the farm, and I will see you Tuesday.